Good evening, beautiful women in the Vision Builders community. Edwina Murphy drew me here, and I'm so thrilled to be coming in with the next interview in our Blossoming Women's series. I hope you caught this morning's interview with Megan. It really was very special. All of the interviews get pinned and into the featured section and the guide section of the Facebook group, so it's super, super easy to keep going back and finding them. Tonight we have with us all the way from Spain, her morning, our evening, Michelle Vina. Michelle, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Edwina. It's lovely to be here on this gorgeous sunny day.
Yeah, well, it's been very hot here today. We're up at 38 degrees. I think we've had about 3 days of it. So we're all quietly melting, but it feels like summer's finally arrived, even though it's autumn. I feel like all the seasons have kind of shifted to later. I don't know if it's the same where you are, but yeah, it feels like everything's just happening. We need to move all the seasons a month.
Yes, everything's changing, sure. Yes.
Um, so what I want to do, I'm just double checking that we are live in the group. So just before I introduce Michelle and what we're going to be talking about tonight, for those of you that do catch us live, I hope you'll take a minute to let us know you're here, say hi, let us know where you are in the world, but also just a reminder to take this time as a sacred pocket of time. As women, the more that we can hold space for each other's stories, lean in and learn from each other, the greater our connection. And the benefits of learning from each other's stories are just the ripple effect is enormous. And so I just invite you to turn off any other distractions. Take a moment to even find a quiet space if you can, just to sit and tune in to this extraordinary story that we're going to be sharing today. And as you do that, think of it as a little bit like a mirror in your own life as you think about the different struggles and celebrations, the relationships, the different work that you have done in the world, all the different pieces. This is like a mirror. You know, our lives are so intertwined in so many ways. We often feel quite isolated and like everybody else's life is happening in a much more elegant way to our own. But the more we lean in and listen to each other's stories, the more we can see the similarities in all of our struggles and successes. So Michelle is coming to us today with her story, but in the journey that she's been on, she has become an occupational therapist and naturopath, and now combines all of her life experience and is doing work as a building biologist, which I only learned about it a couple of years ago in one of my previous series, what that even is. So for those of you that don't know yet, it is a very exciting area to be learning more about. But before we get there, Michelle, I would love to journey back in reading into your story. And you've lived in 29 different homes in 4 countries, which that's a 45-minute interview in itself, I think. But maybe if we go back to your childhood, so somewhere around 8 or 10, do you remember who you were then? Can you remember being that age and what you were passionate about?
I do remember those times, and I can remember, yeah, I remember the school I went to, the house I lived in, the things I did on the weekend, and the important people in my life at the time.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, they were pretty happy times.
yeah,
8 to 10 is actually a really, really happy time in my childhood.
yeah,
We were living in a small rural community in South Australia.
yeah.
Um, a tiny, tiny school, 4 children in my class. So
Oh,
it was real community, really old-fashioned
yeah,
grassroots community, which is kind of hard to replicate these days, I think.
yeah. So do you
Mm.
feel the foundation that was set in your life then, that country living, perhaps the choices that your parents made in the way that you played and the foods that you ate and the people you were surrounded by, Do you see that mirrored in your life now, or do you think it changed radically?
It changed radically for me because as soon as I finished school, I moved away and went to the city and never really went back to the country to live. And there, for me, possibly because of the very conservative areas where I lived,
Yeah.
moving away from that into a much more liberal-minded community changed things a lot for me. And then when I moved away to go to university, and then I worked for 1 year and then went traveling in Europe for a year.
Yeah.
And of course, that made my world much, much bigger.
Yeah.
So I think that childhood was a really great starting point to learn some fundamentals, but no, it blossomed quite quickly.
Yeah, changed dramatically. So
Yeah.
what, where were you headed when you left school? What was your passion? What were you studying?
I studied occupational therapy to start with. I've always been interested in science, and so OT was about problem solving, working with people who had a disease or disability, and OTs look at the way that impacts function on people and try to come up with solutions so that people can live as normal a life with as normal a function as possible.
Yeah.
And so that was my starting point. But I guess if you follow the thread of childhood experiences, I had 3 aunts who lived in the same house originally, same small community, same farm as me, and they'd left school, moved to the city and had careers. So I grew up with it wasn't an expectation, it was just, this is where women go. You finish school and you move to the city and your career begins. And I never questioned that. So really those 3 women were very powerful people at the start of my life, which I didn't recognize at the time. But looking back with a bit more age and wisdom, I do very much.
It is fascinating to look at the different chapters in our lives and who we're surrounded by at the time and how that plays out in different choices we make. Because very differently to you, I grew up in an environment where the women stayed at home. They didn't work. And my mother never worked she didn't work since she was in her early 20s. She was at home with us. And that was the same with most of my girlfriends' mothers and so on. And so I had a kind of a skewed, I knew that I wanted to work, but there was also this kind of expectation that I would just be at home. It's interesting to look at the impact of these things and the choices that we make as we move along. So
Absolutely.
you studied as an OT, you graduated, and then what happened beyond there? Did you then move on? Did you do that at Deakin? Were you here in Geelong then?
Yeah, I worked as an OT in Adelaide for I don't know, maybe 15 or 10 years maybe, and then moved to Melbourne. And yes, I worked at Deakin teaching in the occupational therapy program there.
Yeah.
And it was after that, just after that I started thinking about other options and studied naturopathy. And then after that, building biology. That's been much more recent in the last 5 years.
Yeah, sure. So when I think about, like all the different places that you've lived and the constant moving, I imagine within that there were places or people places that you were living that created a different pathway for you. I know the story of your sister becoming very ill was a significant challenge in your life that perhaps redirected some of the things that you were doing. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. It certainly did redirect things a lot. Yes. So when my sister, more importantly, was 29, so I was, 31, and I was living in Melbourne. and teaching at Deakin, as we've said. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she was living back in South Australia, and I was in Melbourne. And yes, very much that shaped my decision to leave Melbourne and move back to be with her. Because she and I were so incredibly close. She was that sister who'd, I'd think, oh, I must tell Nicole something, and I'd pick up my phone to call her, and her name was flashing on the screen. She was there. We'd finish each other's sentences. We would, so many times I'd go to the shops and I'd see the new fashion for the season, and I'd think, oh, I really like that. I remember this, it was a summer where we had wide leg trousers and flat strappy sandals, and I thought, next time I go shopping, I'm going to get that look. And next time I saw my sister, she was wearing it, but we'd not had a conversation. I always sort of joke that we were twins, separated at by birth, because she was 2 years younger than me. So obviously we weren't twins, but we were so very connected in lots of ways. So when she was diagnosed, did lots of research to find out, okay, what are the things that we know that the science tells us can help people to heal from breast cancer? And connection with other people was a really powerful thing. And so I thought, I can't do that over the phone. I need to be there with her. So I left my job at Deakin and moved back to be with her. Yeah, it didn't actually work, because I mean, I hope that it helped her healing in some ways, but she did end up dying. But it meant that the time that she had left was time we got to be together.
Yeah. And she had a 9-year journey with breast cancer. So there were probably many things that played into her having those 9 years. I think connection it's so interesting that this has become more and more and more a topic of conversation. I did a series last year called The Reconnection Revolution, after I read a book by Johann Hari about the power of connection, particularly with mental health. Physical health, everything is combined. They don't work in isolation. But I think it is something that's fascinating that you bring that up. So in the journey that she had, did that influence the different studies that you went on to do from there?
Yes, it did. I watched Nicole's treatment pathway, and it was very much conventional medicine. And a lot of the side effects from radiation and later on chemo, and all of the fatigue that comes with that, a lot of the side effects are really incredibly powerful, as I'm sure many of the people, your viewers, will know, because it's so common. And that led me to wonder, well, what could we use to make this better? And that's when I started studying naturopathy. Nicole was also seeing a naturopath who was really helping with helping to manage the side effects of the treatment. And I thought, I really want to learn how to do that for other people. I did study naturopathy, and I worked as a naturopath for a really short time, but I ended up not really following it through because 2 reasons, I guess. One, I saw a lot of people who weren't taking responsibility for their health, and I found I really struggled with that, because I'd watched Nicole take, in the end, like 20 supplements a day and do everything possible just to stay alive, to be with her boys for longer. And I was working with people who just weren't ready to take responsibility, and I couldn't make that balance out in my head. And I also I thought there was another missing piece, and that's what led me to building biology, because the naturopathy study that I didn't really encourage us to look at the environment that people were living in. And I've since come to see that I think that's a fundamental part of what plays into our health, where we're living, what that environment's like. The physical environment, the emotional environment really does impact on your health so much. So I
think
didn't,
yeah,
yeah,
I do think it's fascinating because, you know, I think we keep looking for the one thing.
yeah.
And there's something in the way that we're programmed to think through, whether it's through movies or schooling, or I'm not pinpoint exactly where it comes from, but it's like we want to find this one thing. And I remember when I studied naturopathy and then I did functional nutrition, it was all about food. And I
Mm.
became so fixated with food. And then I realized that it's not, you know, you can't eat your way to good health. You've got to sleep as well, and you've got to drink fresh water, and you've got to move your body, and you've got to spend time in nature. And you know, like there's all these different pieces of the pie, and you've got to spend time with other people. As a confirmed hermit, that was something that, you know, like I have to make myself do. Not because I don't love people, but I just love being by myself as well. But you know, there's all these pieces of the puzzle that come together, and if we're not looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, then something then it doesn't work. And so I can see what you're talking about in that we can turn up to a practitioner and it's like, just give me the magic pill. It's like I want the thing, the one thing, but there is no one thing that creates overall well-being. There's all these different pieces of the puzzle. And interestingly, I think in the conversation we're having, one of those pieces of the puzzle that's not talked about enough is purpose, doing meaningful work. It's how we're being of service in the world plays an enormous part in our well-being, which is a big part of the conversation that we're having here. So I think that's a really interesting point that you bring that up, Michelle. So let's keep going. Like talk to us about the building biology and how that was the next piece of the puzzle that you brought into what you do.
Okay, so building biology, I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but it's a science that came out of Germany in the late 1970s. So it's still relatively new and it's only been in Australia for about 25 years. So what a building biologist will do is look at what's going on in the person's home, generally home, sometimes workplace, sometimes school, but we look at the quality of the air, water, the electromagnetic fields, allergens, and a big piece of that is mycotoxins, so mold that might be growing in someone's house, either visually or hidden mold.
Yeah.
And we go in and we say we test, don't guess. So we test the quality of the water and we test the air and we test the levels of the electromagnetic fields, just so that we can see what is happening in that person's field and how does that compare with international standards. And if the readings that we're getting are higher than what is considered safe and healthy, then we look at what do we do about it. So that's when the problem solving comes in again. Okay, this is the problem. The solution is we need to lower the exposure in all of those areas or anything that's elevated. What can we do about it?
Yeah.
And luckily there's lots.
Yeah. So does this come into the paints that we use and the fabrics, you know, like what's used in the carpets that we lay on the floor and the chemicals that are coming off those, all those different pieces? Is that, you know, like how much are you looking at?
Exactly, all of that. So if you were to do a air quality assessment in someone's home, you would see all of those things in the air. So you're right, carpets is a big one, but paints have a lot of VOCs, so chemicals that we call it off-gassing, so that are released over time in a big concentration at the start, but then slowly over time. So yeah, we look at absolutely everything, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything in the home and everything that you bring into the home from the time that it's built. So as a building biologist, people sometimes work helping people to design their home and use healthy building materials, or sometimes we work with homes that are already set up.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of when you're looking at, to go back to my sister's story, that it is part of someone's home is so fundamental to their healing and to their sense of connection, that I think it's really important we get that right.
Yeah. I describe it as our safe bubble. You know, there's not a lot that we can control when we go out the front door, but inside, I mean, I'm not talking about it from the same perspective as you, but it's, when I think about it, it's like we can take control of what we have in the fridge and in the pantry, and what we're using on our skin, and what we're washing our hair with and our bodies with, and what we're using as perfumes and spraying on ourselves. And one of my topics that I love talking about is clothes, and not wrapping our bodies in plastic clothes. And like these are the things that we can take control of inside our lives that support our vitality and well-being. So extending it and having, you can see I like having plants inside, but as much as possible, bringing this into our homes where we spend a big chunk of our lives, even if it's the 8 hours that we sleep and time for breakfast and dinner, that's still a very big chunk of our lives. So when you think about supporting, like maybe even for people that are listening to this, I'm always very aware of how overwhelming it can feel to go, well, what am I supposed to rip up on my carpets and repaint my house? And like, where do we first start thinking about these things from a practical standpoint?
Okay. You're dead right. It is so overwhelming, because once you start to think about it and start to explore it, it just snowballs, and there's so much, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
So to keep it simple, think about diluting anything that might already be there. So flushing the house with fresh air. Just open the windows every day. That's simple. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to be expensive to do some of these fixes. Let some air in. Stop bringing things in by perhaps adopting a no shoes in the house policy, because everything that when you're walking along the street, there's pesticides that have blown, there's traffic fumes, there's dirt, there's bacteria, there's fungi, all of that is coming in on your shoes. So if you can leave your shoes at the front door and stop bringing that in, that's a really good way to have much cleaner air. And fragrances is the really big one, to avoid using anything that has a fragrance in it. So whether that's your moisturizer or your dishwashing liquid or your laundry detergent, anything that's coming into your home, if it can be fragrance free, is going to be so much better for you. So that things can be cheap and easy.
Yeah. I remember reading when my babies were small about fabric softeners. Oh my God.
Softener and dryer sheets, those plastic sheets that we put in our tumble dryers. One of the two of the things that contribute most to the toxic load in our air. Such simple products and easy to change.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's important from my perspective, when we start tuning into these conversations, because I know I've been down some pretty full-on rabbit holes where you feel like it's like I can never get on top of everything. This feels so overwhelming. That our bodies are designed to detox. Like, we're set up with these detox mechanisms, and it's just about lightening the load as much as possible. It's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be completely detox unless we live under a tree in a rainforest somewhere, wherever that little bit of rainforest is left.
Yeah.
It's not going to be. So just trusting our bodies, but also setting our bodies up to be able to detox as well is part of the picture. You wrote a book about your journey with your sister, and I haven't had a chance to read it, but I just read the blurb, and in there you said it's hard to cry with sadness while you're laughing with love. And it really spoke to me. I've got a client at the moment whose husband's just gone into palliative care, in the last stages of cancer. And you know, the women I've worked with, there's been quite a lot of challenges this year, including death. And it is part of what we have been talking about, is this ability to be happy and sad at the same time, and how we kind of balance that. So the fact that that was one of the statements that you wrote in the blurb for your book, it really jumped out at me. When did you write that book, Michelle?
Oh, okay. So I wrote it. It took me 10 years. It's not a. It's a novel-sized book. So the fact that it took 10 years just sort of demonstrates that I did a bit and I stopped and regrouped and did a bit more. And it came about because every Thursday for the last 2 years of Nicole's life, she would drive from the country down to the city. She'd have an intravenous vitamin C treatment, and then she'd go and have acupuncture. And in the gap, in the middle between those two appointments, her and I would always have lunch. So every Thursday for 2 years was our lunch date. And then, of course, when she died, Thursdays really sucked for a long time. And it was my naturopath, my beautiful dear friend, Rosie, who suggested that I do some writing, like quite kind of cathartic writing in that Thursday lunchtime. And I wrote and I kept all the writing. Sometimes I wrote letters to Nicole. Sometimes I just ranted and screamed on the paper. And then eventually Rosie once again said, why don't you put all this together into a book? I didn't really see myself as a writer, but people had read it and people were laughing, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll give it a go. And then I decided to turn it into a fundraiser. You know how sometimes people donate money to charity, they have a cake sale or they run a marathon and they get sponsored. I haven't run since 1996, and I thought, no, I won't be doing that. Perhaps I'll write instead of running. And so I wrote the book, published the book, and then sold it and was able to donate the funds to a charity. And it was just the most cathartic thing. And boy, did I cry. I laughed a lot too, but I cried. Yeah. And I wrote it. It might sound a bit strange, but I really am sure that sometimes Nicole was just putting those ideas into my head. And I think the clearest when I'm cycling. And so I would cycle, and the next chapter or bits of a chapter or stories would come to me, and I'd go home and write them. It was a long, long, slow process, but it really helped.
Very healing, I imagine.
Yeah, it was.
My experience, I've had a sister who died as well. She died at 49, but unlike your story, we had no warning at all. I'd seen her 4 days before her birthday, on my birthday, 24th of April, and 4 days later, I found her dead. She just had an aneurysm. There was no warning. She was on no medications, and she was just gone. And so there was none of that process of kind of getting used to the idea. It was very sudden. And when I think about trying to share her story, or I get very caught in not being able to remember everything to perfection, so it doesn't, it just doesn't come through. And so I have awe and envy for what you've done to have been able to capture all those pieces together. I think it's incredibly special.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was even, sometimes it doesn't even feel like it was my idea. I was just the vehicle.
Yeah, I understand that. And there is something in our awareness. You knew that she was struggling with her health, and it's not that you felt she was going to not succeed in beating the cancer every step of the way, but because of her diagnosis, you were very present, I imagine, with her. And I think there's an enormous lesson in this, because we take for granted so much interactions with people that we care about, and every day in our lives, that we just take for granted that it's going to be there the next day. And so
Yeah.
when you experience something like this, there's a shift in perspective, there's a shift in connection to the everyday moments that is so important and so rich. So yeah, I don't subscribe to the idea that one way is better than the other. But as in, you know, to have time to say goodbye or the sudden shock of loss, yeah. But I think having that awareness of being really connected and present with people, it is a little bit of what I said as we went into this interview, even the more that we can practice this beautiful awareness of leaning into each other's stories and really connecting with people and their stories, that presence creates memories. And I think so much of how we live now is very distracted. We're not present. It's just this kind of distracted living and then thinking of the next thing. So I think that's an enormously powerful awareness to have just from this conversation. Is it something, do you think it came up like that for you as you thought about it?
Yes, I do. And as you were talking then, I was thinking about, you know, my relationships with my girlfriends now. How often do you actually sit and chat and hear the stories? You quickly call someone, or you call while you're driving, or you are in the middle of a conversation, you've got to go because the next thing's happening. We just have lost that ability to stop and listen and really be there.
Yeah.
And certainly with Nicole, because we didn't know, we were never given a date, or, you know, sometimes people, the doctor will say, oh, you've got 6 months or something like that. We never had any of that. So we both kind of just went on assuming she would live forever, that she would be that one statistical person that found this miracle cure. But even so, we prioritized time together.
Yeah.
And I think we did it well. There were patches when we spent a lot of time together, but even when we might not see each other for a week from one Thursday to the next, that was really good, intense time. And that was something new in my life. I learned that from this experience, because you just don't know.
Yeah.
Really just don't know.
I think I mean, there's you know, a couple of things that pull our awareness into that really present kind of state. One is a sense of shock or, you know, sudden change, like a health diagnosis. I think the other thing is change as in changing location. You know, when we're in the same place doing the same thing, it's kind of that hamster wheel effect starts to happen. And so for you, having lived in 29 houses, can you know, do you feel like you have a clear connection to all those changes? Can you think of them quite clearly, or is it something that you have to spend time digging back through memories to find them?
The changes that happened in my adult life, I can see the common threads.
Yeah.
And I think it was possessions in a way. If I took the same things,
Yeah.
maybe the same favorite chair and the same favorite vase for my flowers and the same picture for the wall, that meant each house was home. I know for my daughter, when she was young, we moved a fair bit, and for her, she said when there was a vase of flowers on the dining table, she knew that this was home. That was the thing that sort of tied for her. So yeah, I think the threads that tie us to our homes can be practical things, or they can just be a feeling. And as the older I've got, the more I see that it's more about a feeling and a sense of connection and belonging, and that it's a feeling you can create quite quickly by setting the intention that this is your safe place, this is your home.
Is it people? Can you feel like you're home somewhere if you don't have any people, but you're, you know, like your people?
No, when I moved to Spain, the first time I didn't speak Spanish. didn't really know anybody. I just thought, whoa, this will never be my home. This is really strange. Actually still feel that from the point of view that I still don't speak Spanish. And but when I go back to Adelaide, even though I haven't lived there for a very long time, that still feels like home. But yes, you definitely have to have people. But I also think I can feel like I'm home when I see my best friend in Adelaide, when I'm in her kitchen. That's my home.
Yeah.
So it's not always bricks and mortar. It's the energy of this person, the way that we connect together, that becomes the definition of home for me.
I am always fascinated by the way that things link up when I have conversations with people. I had an experience just in the last week where I sold my car, and the woman that came to buy it was from Syria, and she had no English at all. She'd been here for a year, and she came with her husband and I think extended family. There was sort of 3, 4 males and her. They'd come to support her, and we had the whole conversation through a translator on her phone. And she just had an operation. She just had a hip replacement here, and I was thinking about how I would cope in another country, going through a medical procedure like that, being in a hospital, navigating life, being unable to communicate with people. The food was different, the culture was different, like it just, and by the time I left, I just wanted to burst into tears for her. I felt so like I just wanted to wrap her up and say it's like it brought out, I think she was a little bit younger than me, but not much, but it brought out this real mother sort of instinct. I just wanted to make it okay for her. I'm in awe of you, Michelle, to live in a country that you don't speak the language, just navigating everyday life. That's intensely brave.
Well, brave or stupid is always the expression, isn't it? But yeah, there are a lot of people here who do speak English, so you can always get back up.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
when things go wrong, like the woman you're talking about from Syria having surgery. I mean, we haven't had any illnesses or anything since we've been here. The worst I've had is a very, very angry, very drunk Spanish man hit my car, and got very angry with me for being in the way. So that was, I don't know how to deal with this situation. So I went to the police station, and then they told me off for leaving the scene. I'm supposed to have stayed there with this angry man and called the police. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So it's when things go wrong that it's hard work.
Yeah.
Which is, what you're saying with the woman from Syria. But it sounds like what you were trying to do with her was to create home for her by giving her a hug. And yeah, it's hard.
Just trying to put myself, and I think this is, being English speaking, and I have traveled a lot around the world, and you can always find somebody who can speak English, even if it's walking into a hotel or reception in a large building or something. There's somebody that can speak English. Interestingly, my travels in Japan, which incidentally is one of my favorite places on the planet, it's a lot harder to find people, like in train stations and so on, that speak English, which I found really surprising. But so you find there are quite a lot of English speaking people in Spain.
Yeah, it does make life a whole lot easier. Yes. And my kids go to an English speaking school. So there's that community there. So it's not as challenging as it might sound.
What a rich and amazing journey experience, like all these different experiences. So if you look at your journey, you've lived in the country and in cities in Australia. You've lived in 4 different countries. So Australia, Spain,
England and France.
England and France, 29 different homes. You've got multiple qualifications in your occupational therapy, naturopathy, building biology, your whole journey with your sister. You've got children. I don't know how many relationships you've had, personal relationships, but all these different pieces of the puzzle that have gone into shaping the woman that you are today. There's a phenomenal wealth of wisdom in there. If I asked you what you think your superpowers are from all those experiences, what do you think they are? If you had to name your superpowers, what are they?
I think it's to never ever to remember to never take anything for granted, because everything is flimsy and I feel like the earth's not solid. Everything's shifting all of the time. So I think I can navigate that pretty well. I can duck and weave quite easily. And I can usually 90% of the time see the positive in something rather than falling victim to the hardship of something. And I like to think that I can encourage other people to do that as well. Which is why, you know, I'm trying to do this work teaching other people about ways to reduce the risk of breast cancer, because I want to use all those experiences to help other people see the positives. I think they're my superpowers. I don't know. That's a nice way of putting it, but yeah, I think so.
I think personal responsibility is absolutely a superpower. And it's interesting because that goes back to the work that you got frustrated in when you were doing the naturopathy in trying to support people. Personal responsibility, I am 100% responsible for my own health and happiness. This is something that I think is absolutely a superpower. I didn't learn it till much later in life. So I have lived in both places. I've lived from that place of being the victim of everything, and I was miserable because of what everybody else was doing. And you know, like I've lived on that side of the fence. And then when I understood the other side, being responsible, in personal empowerment that gives you is life-changing. So supporting people to understand that is 100% a superpower, Michelle. Yeah, fantastic. So taking all those pieces of the puzzle as well, all the things you've done, all the life experience you've had, what do you feel is your higher purpose here? Why have you gone through all the things you've gone through, lived in all the places you've lived, had all the different relationships that you've had with people through work environments and personal relationships and sisters, siblings, parents? All of that adds up, and there's a higher purpose for your life. There's a reason you're here. What do you think it is?
I think it's to share the thread from woman to woman. So with my friends and my daughters, that my higher purpose is to ensure that they move forward into the world in a positive way with great self-responsibility and great enthusiasm and joy. Once again, never ever taking anything for granted, just being grateful, being joyful, and being positive. Yeah. So my higher purpose is to instill that in others, I think.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. So for people that are intrigued to learn more and to learn from what you teach, I imagine there is a big proponent of it. Obviously, part of what you do is going into people's homes, which you can't come back here and do at the moment unless somebody's going to pay for a private jet for you. I'll just put that out there. But I imagine there's things that you offer online as well. What is the best way for people to find your best place for people to look?
Best thing is to find me on Facebook or on Instagram. Yeah. So my business is called Home Free Building Biology. And on there, because I am transitioning from being in people's homes to doing it online, I'm setting up an online coaching program. There'll be webinars, and my social media feed is all about tips and things that you can do in your home to create a healthier home and body, and to support your body to detox. And there's also, of course, my Facebook group, which you can join and get tips and ideas and share, just be with people who have a common interest in this area.
Fantastic, fantastic. So if I was going to pour multiple millions of dollars into your bank account right now, what's the change that you would make in the world? What would you do with it?
I would, of course, find a cure for cancer, but I would peel some of that money off, because that won't be a quick fix, and I would use some of that money to support the children of women who have cancer. Because it's not just that one person, it has such a big ripple into families. And when children lose their mum, their half, it impacts them there and then for all of their lives, and I think generations to come. So I'd use that money to sort that out.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but that's what the money covers, isn't it? Figuring that out.
Wow. Wow. I'll send out a prayer of manifestation prayer that it lands in your account.
Thank you.
Do that work. It'd be amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been a delight to meet you and to learn a bit about your story and what has shaped you into the woman you are today and why you're doing the work that you do now in the world. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edwina. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, gorgeous women. That's us from us. Well, this evening on our side of the globe, and for the morning on the other side of the globe. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. And I'll be back tomorrow morning, our time, with Debbie Silver. I'm so excited for that conversation. All right, that's it from me today. So much love, and bye for now.